In the year 480 before Christ, the Persian Empire commanded more than 2 million souls on the march. No nation, no king, no wall had resisted its advance. The Great King Xerxes did not conquer territories. He absorbed them like the sea abhor the shore. But then they arrived at a place called the Hot Gates. And for the first time in the history of the most powerful empire on earth, the Persian generals began to send messages from the front that did not ask for reinforcements. Therefore, what you are about to read is not the story of Spartan heroism. It is the story of the moment when an empire that had never known fear learned what it means to encounter something that cannot die. The year 480 before Christ was not simply a year on the Persian calendar. It was the moment when the Achaemenid Empire reached its maximum expression of absolute power. Xerxes I, the Great King, had inherited the most feared throne of the known world. His father, Darius, had tried to subdue Greece and failed at Marathon. Therefore, Xerxes did not come to negotiate or to conquer. He came to erase. The army he mobilized was so large that the Greek historians, when trying to count it, simply stopped believing in numbers. But the numbers were real and all pointed toward a small country of mountains that refused in an absurd way to surrender. The Persian intelligence was sophisticated. Xerxes had spies, scouts and Greek allies who informed him in detail about the terrain and the enemy. He knew that Greece was a mosaic of city-states divided, incapable of uniting for more than a few months. He knew that Athens was a naval power, but a modest land force. And he knew that Sparta, although feared, was a city without walls in the heart of the Peloponnese, far from the north. But what the Persian spies could not transmit with words was the real meaning of what it meant to face a Spartan in a closed space. That information only existed in direct experience, and direct experience had a price that no map could calculate. The pass of Thermopylae was not a place chosen at random. The Spartan king Leonidas selected it with surgical precision. At its narrowest point, the pass measured barely 15 meters wide, flanked by vertical cliffs on the left and the Malian Gulf to the sea on the right. It was a geometric trap. In that space, the Persian numerical superiority became a problem, not an advantage, because an army of 1 million men that can only attack 15 at a time is effectively an army of 15 men. Therefore, when the Persian scouts measured the corridor and brought the data to Xerxes, the figure they delivered was not a number of meters. It was a death sentence written in Greek limestone. The immortals were the absolute elite of the Persian army. 10,000 warriors selected, trained and equipped to be the spearhead of any offensive. Their name was not propaganda. When one fell, another immediately took his place, keeping the number constant. For the known world of 480 before Christ, the immortals were not soldiers. They were an institution of terror. They had crushed rebellions in Egypt, Babylon, and Media. They had marched across 3 continents without encountering sustained resistance. But the day the immortals formed in front of the pass of Thermopylae and saw the Spartan line for the first time, something in the equation changed. The reports that came back to the Persian headquarters that night did not have the tone of victory. They had the tone of a question. Xerxes ordered the spies to observe the enemy before the first day of combat. What they returned to report disconcerted the Persian court almost as much as the battle itself. The Spartans, in sight of the largest army the world had ever seen, were not preparing to fight. They were preparing for the opposite. Some exercised. Others combed their long hair with absolute calm, methodical, almost ceremonial. A Greek informant from Marathon of Sparta explained to the Great King what that image meant. The Spartans always combed their hair before entering battle. Therefore, what Xerxes observed was not carelessness or ignorance of danger. It was something that the Persian Empire, with all its power, had never encountered before. Men who had decided, without any doubt, that that place was where their story would end, and they were at peace with that. The dawn of the first day of combat at Thermopylae arrived wrapped in coastal mist. The Malian Gulf exhaled cold steam over the rocks, and the stone corridor that separated the two armies seemed at that hour the threshold of another world. The Persian generals had spent the night calculating. The strategy was simple, almost insulting in its logic. Send waves of Median and Scythian infantry to the front. Saturate the Spartan line with pure volume and let the numbers do the work they had always done. It was the same formula that had worked in Egypt, in Lydia, in Babylon. It was the formula of the empire, but the corridor of Thermopylae was not Egypt, nor Lydia, nor Babylon. It was a funnel of 15 meters, where the formula of the empire became its own contradiction. Each soldier who advanced did not add strength. He added pressure on the men in front of him, pushing them towards something that did not retreat. The arithmetic of absolute power had just found its first impossible denominator. The Spartan phalanx was not simply a military formation. It was a technology of war designed over generations to function in exactly this type of terrain: narrow, confined, without space to flank. Each hoplite held a circular shield of almost 1 meter in diameter. The aspis, which not only protected his own left side, but also the right side of the companion next to him. The formation was an organism, a perfect interlock mechanism where individual weakness disappeared inside the collective fortress. The spears, the daru, between 2.5 and 3 meters, creating a barrier of metal tips that projected beyond the shield before any opponent could reach the hoplite who held it. Therefore, what the first Persian wave found when rounding the inner curve of the pass was not a group of men. It was a wall that breathed, calculated and punished every square meter of advance with a precision that no amount of bravery could overcome by brute force. The reports that began to return from the front during the first hours of combat created an unprecedented anomaly in the administrative history of the Persian Empire. The couriers, the mounted messengers of the Achaemenid communication system, the same system that had coordinated campaigns across 3 continents, brought news that the scribes did not know how to register with the standard vocabulary of Persian victories. The waves advanced. The waves returned not in orderly defeat, in collapse of cohesion. The soldiers who had entered the corridor as a compact formation came out, or rather were pushed back as a mass without geometry. The Persian military terminology had words for tactical retreat, for reorganization, for strategic withdrawal, but it did not have a word for what the messengers were describing. The moment when a professional and experienced army comes into contact with something, and its first instinctive response, before any order, is to move away from it as fast as physically possible. Xerxes made a decision that revealed, perhaps more than any battle, the deep nature of his power and its simultaneous limitation. He ordered that the soldiers who had retreated be returned to the front, not as tactical reorganization, but by direct coercion. The immortals and the royal guard positioned themselves behind the waves of infantry with explicit instructions to prevent any unauthorized retreat. It was a tactic documented in the ancient world. The Greeks would later call it decimation, but its use at Thermopylae revealed something that no official communique could hide. The Persian command had lost confidence that its troops would advance voluntarily. Therefore, the stone corridor of Thermopylae had achieved in less than 1 day what no army in the history of the empire had achieved in years of campaign. It had turned the will to fight of the largest army in the world into something that needed to be administered by force from within before it could face the force coming from outside. By the afternoon of the first day, when the sunlight began to filter at an angle between the walls of the pass and the shadows lengthened over the stones, Xerxes convened his war council. The numbers on the table were from any rational perspective absurd. The Persian army outnumbered the Greeks in a proportion that no general in history had needed to win. The Spartan casualties were, according to all available reports, minimal. The Persian ones were the opposite. Not in absolute terms. The empire could absorb losses for days, weeks, months, but in terms of something more difficult to quantify and more impossible to replenish, the certainty that the system worked. Therefore, what ended that first day was not simply an unresolved battle. It was the first visible crack in the narrative that sustained the Persian Empire. The story that the empire itself told about itself. The story that no resistance was possible, that the outcome of facing Persia was mathematically inevitable. That story had died in a corridor of 15 meters, and everyone in the war council knew it. 2 full days of combat had passed, and the result was the same. The Persian Empire, with all its war machinery, had not advanced a single meter inside the pass of Thermopylae. The Spartans rotated their formations with a discipline that the Persian observers described as supernatural. When one line grew tired, another took its place without the wall of shields opening for an instant. It was a system of resistance designed to have no visible point of failure. But the geography that protected Leonidas also had a secret that the local Greeks knew, and that until that moment no one had chosen to reveal. There existed a mountain path called Oenopeia, a goat path that wound through the heights behind the Greek positions and emerged on the other side of the pass. It was narrow, difficult and dangerous, but it existed. And at some point during the second night, a man named Ephialtes of Trachis made the decision to cross the Persian lines and offer that information to the Great King in exchange for a reward. With that decision, the perfect geometry of the Spartan defense acquired for the first time a vulnerability that no phalanx could block. Xerxes did not hesitate. In the darkness of the second night, the general Hydarnes was summoned and received an order that completely transformed the nature of the operation. Take 20,000 elite soldiers, follow the traitor Ephialtes along the Oenopeia path, surround the Greek positions from the heights, and descend upon their rear at dawn. It was a classic envelopment maneuver, the type of movement that the Persians executed with mechanical precision in open terrain. The problem was the terrain. The Oenopeia path was narrow, irregular, and completely exposed to any force that defended it from above. Therefore, Xerxes needed absolute speed. The movement had to be completed in the darkness before the Greeks knew what was approaching their backs. And Hydarnes departed at midnight with his immortals. They advanced in silence through the mountain, guided by a man who knew every stone of the path. What none of the 20,000 knew was that there was a Greek force positioned exactly on that path, the 1,000 warriors of Phocis, whose specific mission was to prevent exactly what was happening at that moment. The Phocians made a decision that history would record with ambiguity for centuries. Instead of holding the path, they withdrew toward the heights of the mountain to reorganize and defend from an elevated position. It was an understandable tactical choice. They were outnumbered 20-1, but its practical effect was to leave the Oenopeia path free for the Persian advance. And Hydarnes did not stop to fight the Phocians. He ignored them. His objective was not that force on the mountain. It was the rear of Leonidas, and every minute that passed brought him closer to dawn and to the moment of the encirclement. Therefore, the defense system that Leonidas had built with architectural precision during 2 days began to come undone, not by a failure in the phalanx, not by a mistaken strategy, but by a variable that no military formation could control. The decision of a man who knew the path, the choice of 1,000 men who yielded it, and the unstoppable advance of 20,000 who took it. The trap had been inverted. The hunter and the prey had exchanged positions in the darkness of a Greek mountain. The reaction of Leonidas upon receiving the news of the Persian flanking is one of the most analyzed and debated moments of ancient military history. He convened a war council at dawn on the third day. The Greek allies, Thespians, Thebans, Corinthians, Phocians, and others received the explicit option to withdraw. The majority did so. It was a rational decision. The position was untenable. The orderly retreat preserved forces to defend the Isthmus of Corinth, the true line of defense of mainland Greece. Leonidas let them go, but the 300 Spartans and the 700 Thespians who chose to stay did not do so out of desperation or miscalculation. They did so within a logic that the Persian world was incapable of processing. The logic that some positions have a value that surpasses the survival of those who hold them. Leonidas knew he would die that day. He had known it before marching from Sparta. The question had never been whether the 300 would survive. The question was, how long could they make the Persian Empire bleed before that day arrived? And what would that time buy for the rest of Greece? The last combat on the hill of Kolonos lasted hours. The Persians launched waves from the front, while Hydarnes descended from the rear. The Spartans and Thespians knew there was no escape and fought according to that certainty, not with the tactical restraint of those who need to conserve energy for tomorrow, but with the absolute freedom of those who no longer have a tomorrow to conserve. The ancient sources, including Herodotus, record that when the spears broke, the Spartans used the short swords, the xiphos, and when the swords no longer reached, they used their hands and teeth. Therefore, what the Persian Empire experienced in that final act was not the defeat of an army. It was contact with a category of resistance for which there was no administrative or tactical response. Men who had completely disconnected the survival mechanism and operated from another place. Xerxes won the Battle of Thermopylae. That is historically indisputable. But the price he paid in time, in troops, in the fracture of the narrative of invincibility that sustained his empire, transformed that victory into the first link in the chain that 10 years later would end up destroying his ambitions over Greece forever.